The Stranger in the Snow. New Year's Eve is supposed to be a night of celebration, but for me, it's the night I came face to face with the kind of evil I thought only existed in movies. I don't go out much anymore, and I've stopped trusting people so easily. All because of that night. It started with a fight. My girlfriend and I had planned to spend the evening together at her friend's house. But halfway through the party, we got into a stupid argument about something I don't even remember now. She told me I was being dramatic, and I told her she didn't take me seriously. The kind of petty nonsense that feels monumental in the heat of the moment. Eventually, I stormed out, slamming the door behind me. The snowstorm that had been predicted all day had finally arrived, blanketing the streets in white. My car was parked a few blocks away, and the bitter cold was sobering as I trudged through the snow, cursing myself for ruining the night. I remember pulling out my phone, thinking I'd call an Uber instead of driving, just to be safe. But my battery was nearly dead, and as I opened the rideshare app, the screen went black. Great, I muttered. Happy freaking New Year. I thought about going back to the party to cool off and charge my phone, but my pride wouldn't let me. I decided I'd just walk home. It wasn't too far, maybe 2 miles, but the snow was falling harder now, and the streets were deserted. The wind howled, cutting through my jacket like a knife. I'd made it about 6 blocks when I heard the sound of tires crunching through the snow behind me. A car was creeping down the street, its headlights cutting through the swirling white. I turned, squinting against the glare, and saw an old sedan coming to a slow stop just a few feet away. The driver rolled down the window and a man leaned out. "Hey there," he called, his voice loud and cheerful. "Need a ride?" I hesitated. The man looked to be in his 40s with a scruffy beard and a puffy red jacket. He didn't seem threatening, but there was something in his eyes, something a little too intense. Still, the snow was falling harder, and the thought of walking the rest of the way home was miserable. "No thanks," I said. "I'm not far." He smiled. "Come on, buddy, it's freezing out here. I'm heading downtown anyway. Where you going?" I hesitated again, shivering in the cold. A little voice in the back of my mind told me to keep walking, but I ignored it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that this guy was just trying to help. So against my better judgment, I nodded. "Sure, thanks." The inside of the car was warmer than I expected, and the guy had a stack of blankets on the passenger seat. I climbed in, brushing the snow off my jacket, and gave him my address. He nodded, smiling as he put the car in gear. "Name's Charlie," he said, extending a hand. "What's yours?" "Nick," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, almost too firm. "Nice to meet you, Nick," Charlie said, his eyes flicking to me in the rearview mirror. "So what's a guy like you doing out in the middle of a storm on New Year's Eve?" "Just heading home," I said, keeping my answer short. Charlie chuckled. "Not much of a party guy, huh?" I shrugged, trying to appear casual, but something about the way he was watching me made me uneasy. His gaze lingered just a little too long, and his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The car turned onto a side street, and I realized we were heading in the wrong direction. I think you missed the turn," I said. Charlie glanced at me in the mirror, his smile widening. "Oh, don't worry about it. I know a shortcut." Alarm bells started ringing in my head. My stomach knotted as I stared out the window, watching the houses grow farther apart. We were heading out of the residential area into a more isolated part of town. "I don't mind taking the main road," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nah, trust me," Charlie said. "This way's faster." I felt my pulse quicken. My hands were sweating, even in the cold. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I glanced at the door handle, wondering if I could just jump out, but we were going too fast now. "So," Charlie said, breaking the silence, "you ever think about how New Year's is all about starting fresh? Leaving behind the old, making way for the new?" "Sure," I said, trying to sound calm. He nodded, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. "It's funny, isn't it, how some people get a fresh start and some people don't?" I didn't respond. My heart was racing now, and I could feel the weight of his stare in the mirror. "Take me, for example," he continued, his tone shifting. "I've been stuck in the same damn rut for years, but this year's going to be different. I've decided to make some changes." "What kind of changes?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Charlie's smile widened. "Big ones." I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my keys. I gripped them tightly in my fist, angling one of the sharp edges outward like a makeshift weapon. "Listen," I said, forcing myself to meet his gaze in the mirror. I think I'll just get out here. Charlie's eyes narrowed. We're not there yet. I don't care, I said, my voice firmer now. Stop the car. Let me out. For a moment, he didn't respond. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the crunch of tires on snow. Then, without warning, he slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop, and I was thrown forward against the seatbelt. Fine, Charlie said, his voice cold. Get out. I didn't hesitate. I yanked the door handle and stumbled out into the snow, my heart pounding. The wind was freezing, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. But as I turned to walk away, I heard Charlie get out of the car. You know, he called after me, his voice carrying over the wind. You're lucky. Most people don't get second chances. I didn't look back. I just kept walking, my keys clutched tightly in my hand. I could hear his footsteps crunching in the snow behind me, getting closer. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to move faster. Then, just as I thought he was about to grab me, I heard another sound, an engine. Headlights appeared at the end of the street, and a pickup truck rumbled toward us. Charlie stopped, muttering something under his breath, and I seized the opportunity to run. I flagged down the truck, waving my arms wildly. The driver rolled down the window, a look of concern on his face. You okay, buddy? Yeah, I panted, glancing over my shoulder. Charlie was already walking back to his car, his face hidden in the shadows. Just needed a ride. I don't know who the truck driver was, but he saved my life that night. He dropped me off at a gas station, and I called a friend to pick me up. By the time I got home, Charlie and his car were long gone. I filed a report with the police the next day, but they didn't seem optimistic about finding him. Could have just been a guy messing with you, one of the officers said. But I knew better. There was something wrong with Charlie, something dangerous. And even now, a year later, I can still see his face in the mirror, smiling that too wide smile. This year I'm staying home for New Year's, alone, safe, and I'll never get into a stranger's car again. The New Year's invitation. I hate New Year's Eve, always have. The noise, the crowds, the forced optimism, it's just not my thing. This year, I had planned to stay home, binge some Netflix, and go to bed before midnight. But when a guy like Joel invites you to a party, it's hard to say no. Joel was one of those people who made you feel like you belonged, even if you didn't. We worked together, though we weren't close. And when he overheard me talking about my non-existent plans, he insisted I come to his house party. It'll be low-key, he promised. Just a few friends, good food, good drinks. You'll love it. I hesitated. I didn't know Joel that well, but he seemed genuine. Besides, staying home alone sounded pathetic even to me. So I said yes. Joel lived on the edge of town, in a big old farmhouse surrounded by fields. I showed up around 9:30 p.m., bottle of wine in hand, already feeling out of place. The driveway was empty except for Joel's truck, and the house was dark except for a faint glow in the living room. I knocked on the door, feeling the sting of cold air on my face. After a moment, the door creaked open, and Joel stood there, grinning. Hey, you made it, he said, pulling me inside. Come on, let me take your coat. The house was quiet, too quiet for a party. I glanced around, expecting to see people mingling or music playing, but it was just Joel. Am I early? I asked. Nah, everyone's just running late, he said, shrugging. You know how it is on New Year's, traffic, last-minute plans, but hey, more food for us, right? I laughed nervously, following him into the living room. A small fire crackled in the fireplace, and a table was set up with snacks, drinks, and party hats. It looked festive enough, but something felt off. The silence pressed against my ears, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Joel was watching me too closely. We sat by the fire, chatting and sipping wine. Joel was charismatic, like always, but there was a strange edge to him tonight. Something restless in the way he kept tapping his fingers on the arm of his chair. I asked a few times when the others were supposed to arrive, and he brushed it off with vague answers. By 11 p.m., I was starting to get uncomfortable. The party had clearly turned into just the two of us, and I was regretting my decision to come. You know, I said, setting my glass down, I think I should probably head out. I've got an early morning tomorrow. Don't be ridiculous, Joel interrupted, his grin tightening. It's New Year's Eve. You can't leave before midnight. Yeah, but come on, he said, standing up and blocking my path. Just stay a little longer. It's not like you've got somewhere else to be. The way he said it made my stomach knot. His voice was calm, almost casual, but there was an undertone that made my skin crawl. I really should go, I said, stepping back. Maybe next time. Joel's grin vanished, replaced by a blank, almost predatory expression. You know, he said slowly, you should learn to be a little more grateful. Most people don't get invited to something like this. I froze. The air felt heavy, like the room itself was holding its breath. Joel stepped closer, his eyes boring into mine. You've got no idea what it takes to plan something like this, he continued, his voice low. The time, the effort, and you just want to walk out like none of it matters. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to diffuse the situation. I appreciate the invitation, I stammered. I really do, but I think I'm just not feeling great, and Joel laughed. It wasn't a friendly laugh, it was sharp, almost mocking. You don't get it, do you? This isn't just some party. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He tilted his head, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. You're here for a reason, Eric. Panic set in. I didn't know what he meant, but I knew I had to get out of there. My coat was still hanging by the front door, and I realized with a sickening jolt that my phone was in the pocket. I think I'm gonna grab some air, I said, forcing a smile. Just need to clear my head. Joel's eyes narrowed, but he stepped aside, gesturing toward the hallway. Sure, go ahead. I walked as calmly as I could toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The moment I reached for my coat, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around to find Joel standing right behind me, too close, his face eerily calm. You really think you're leaving? He asked softly. I didn't answer. I yanked my coat off the hook, grabbing my phone from the pocket. But before I could unlock it, Joel grabbed my wrist, his grip like iron. Let go, I said, my voice shaking. You don't get it, do you? He hissed, his face inches from mine. You're part of something bigger tonight, something important. You can't just walk away. He was stronger than I expected, and as I struggled to pull free, I realized I wasn't going to win. So I did the only thing I could think of. I kneed him in the groin as hard as I could. Joel let out a strangled cry, doubling over, and I seized the opportunity to bolt out the door. The icy air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I sprinted across the driveway, the snow crunching under my boots, and stumbled toward the road. Eric, Joel shouted behind me. Come back here, you don't understand. I didn't look back. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911, but I managed to hit the call button as I ran. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked. I'm at a house on Parker Road, I gasped. A guy just tried to, he won't let me leave. He's crazy. Stay on the line, the operator said. Officers are on their way. I kept running until I saw the flashing lights of a police car in the distance. When the officers arrived, I told them everything. How Joel had invited me to the party, how no one else showed up, how he'd tried to stop me from leaving. They searched the house, but didn't find anything suspicious. Joel played it off like a misunderstanding, claiming he just had too much to drink. But the look he gave me as they put him in the back of the squad car chilled me to the bone. See you next year, Eric, he said, his grin as sharp as a knife. It's been a year since that night, and I still don't know what Joel's something bigger was. Maybe he was just messing with me. Maybe he wasn't. But one thing's for sure, I'm never accepting a party invitation from someone I barely know again. The man in the parking lot. New Year's Eve is supposed to be a night of excitement, a fresh start, but for me, it's the night I barely made it home alive. It wasn't fireworks or champagne that marked the start of my new year. It was the terror of being hunted by a stranger. It started when I decided to leave the party early. It wasn't that I wasn't having fun, I was. My friend Sarah had thrown her usual New Year's bash and the energy was high. But around 11:15 p.m., I started feeling restless. Maybe it was the crowded living room, or maybe it was just my introverted side kicking in. Either way, I figured I could slip out quietly, make it home before the ball dropped, and enjoy the peace of my apartment to ring in the new year. I said my goodbyes, dodging Sarah's protest to stay, and headed out to the parking lot. The cold hit me immediately, sharp and biting against my skin. The snow was coming down lightly, dusting the cars in the lot like powdered sugar. My car was parked in the far corner, under a dim, flickering streetlight. That's when I saw him. He was standing near the entrance to the lot, leaning against a rusted sedan. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just a guy smoking a cigarette, his breath visible in the frigid air. But as I walked toward my car, I noticed he was watching me, not glancing, not casually looking around, staring. I tried to ignore it, pulling my coat tighter around me and picking up my pace. My boots crunched loudly in the snow, and I fumbled for my keys in my pocket. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I told myself I was overreacting. It's just a guy in a parking lot, I thought. Nothing weird about that. But then he started walking toward me. I didn't hear his footsteps at first, over the sound of my own, but when I glanced back, he was closer, too close. The cigarette was gone, and his hands were shoved into the pockets of a tattered jacket. His face was shadowed under the brim of a baseball cap, but I could feel his eyes on me. My heart rate spiked. "Can I help you?" I called, trying to sound confident, even though my voice wavered. He didn't answer. He just kept walking, his pace slow and deliberate, like he wasn't in a hurry, like he knew I wasn't going anywhere. I reached my car and yanked the door handle, but it was locked. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. I could hear his footsteps now, crunching in the snow, steady and unrelenting. Finally, the key turned, and I threw the door open, jumping inside and slamming it shut. My breath was coming in quick, shallow gasps, and I fumbled to lock the doors. The click of the locks felt like a tiny victory, but when I looked up, he was standing right outside the driver's side window. I'll never forget his face. His skin was pale, almost gray in the dim light, and his lips were cracked and bloodless. His eyes, though, that's what froze me. They were wide and unblinking, filled with something I can only describe as hunger. He didn't look angry or crazed. He looked excited. I mouthed the word "go" at him, hoping he'd take the hint, but he just smiled. A slow, crooked smile that made my stomach turn. Then, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small knife, tapping the blade against the window. "Roll it down," he said, his voice muffled by the glass. I shook my head, frantically starting the car. The engine sputtered for a moment before roaring to life. He didn't flinch. He just stood there watching me, the knife still tapping against the window. "Roll it down," he repeated, louder this time. I threw the car into reverse, my tires spinning for a moment on the icy pavement before catching traction. The man stepped back as I jerked the wheel, backing out of the parking space as fast as I could. But as I straightened out and hit the gas, he stepped in front of the car. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering in my chest. He stood there motionless, the knife dangling at his side. For a moment I thought he was going to lunge at me, but instead he smiled again, raising his free hand in a mock wave. And then he did something I'll never forget. He mouthed the words, "See you soon." I didn't wait to find out what he meant. I swerved around him, my tires skidding on the snow, and sped out of the lot. My hands were gripping the wheel, so tightly my knuckles turned white, and my eyes darted between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. But he didn't follow. He just stood there, watching me disappear into the night. When I got home, I locked every door and window in my apartment and double-checked them twice. My phone was buzzing with texts from Sarah, asking if I'd made it home okay, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I just sat on the couch, staring at the clock as it ticked closer to midnight. I didn't call the police. What would I even say? That some guy scared me in a parking lot? That he had a knife? By the time they got there, he'd be long gone. And besides, part of me didn't want to believe it had really happened. Maybe it was just a random weirdo. Maybe I'd never see him again. But deep down, I knew better. It's been a year since that night, and I still can't walk through a parking lot without looking over my shoulder. Every time I hear footsteps behind me, my heart races. Every time I see someone standing too still, I feel that same cold dread creep over me. I don't go out on New Year's Eve anymore. I stay home, keep the lights on, and wait for the clock to strike midnight. Because no matter how much time passes, I can't shake the feeling that one day when I least expect it, I'll see him again.
Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.